We've been looking at the Hsin Hsin Ming.
Yes.
I'm not even sure quite how to pronounce it. We are serious beginners' minds.
It's pronounced like there's a SH, Hsin Hsin Ming.
Oh, is it Hsin Hsin Ming? Okay, okay. And that's that's what we've been looking at. And we've been sort of doing this in the sangha. There are about 10 of us, which is lovely.
Mm-hmm.
And we're now going into different people's homes every week. It's really lovely.
It sounds great.
And we've been sort of reading the whole of the translation that you brought to Sheldon
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
every week. And then after sitting, and then sort of looking at it verse by verse, but sort of trying to get a sense of a whole, but a bit verse by verse. And so we've got to about verse 5 or 6, not very far, but that's why we suddenly thought, well, let's quickly have a conversation with you, because it
Right.
would be really...
Because it appears in a way, little couplets.
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's the translation that we've got. So I suppose the first question that we've got, and we asked the Sangha on Monday and everybody came up with some stuff, and this is what we've kind of come up with. The first question is, why the Hsin Hsin Ming? Why is it something for you, and do you think it is? And how do you use it? But I suppose the question is why. Yeah.
Why did I find it
Yes.
appealing as a teaching or connect with it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the Hsin Hsin Ming is an interesting poem or document in itself, historically, because it's a beautiful expression of what you might call Buddho-Taoism. Because it's in as many ways a Taoist document as much as a Buddhist one.
Okay.
And Chan, 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 was the expression of this integration of Buddhism and Taoism, which happened exclusively and interestingly in China only. And that became later in Japan Zen.
Okay.
So it's a foundational expression of how Northern Indian Buddhism, which is quite different in its way of thinking, just culturally, when it mixed with Taoism, which it met in China, and became this kind of practice, which ultimately was taken as Zen in Japan, which is really founded in Chan, in China. So it's historically an interesting document in that regard. And it is, as you can see, an expression of what it means to practice in such a way that it was very different than classical religious or theological approaches. Because it gives you 32 different propositions throughout the poem, if you count them.
Oh, okay.
And then pulls the rug out from every one of them.
Yes.
So that you're left with no place to stand. And so that verse, which you will come to at some point, which you've read over and over, but in your studies, where it says, don't keep searching for the truth, just let go of your opinions, is pointing to something essential about this type of practice, which it isn't about finding some theological or philosophical proposition that you can land on and then believe in as your core. It's basically saying you have to let go of all of those, including every opinion you have, including your most cherished opinions about your spiritual practice, and instead rest in the ever-changing, contingent flow of each moment. And that's what this Buddha Taoist practice is pointing to. And so the poem is, in a way, setting up all these ways in which we tend to try to find certainty or groundedness. And then saying, and not that, and not that, and not that. Yes. So the question that remains is, so what? So where do you land? And once again, it's in the foundations of mindfulness. What did the Buddha call them? The 3 marks of existence are, and this is how, I'm going to back up for a second. This is how the Indian mind was very different than the Chinese. In Indian culture, they made lists of things as a way to understand phenomena. There were the 4 noble truths. There was the 8-fold path, the 3 marks of existence, the 12-fold chain of causation, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, on and on. It's a way of codification of consciousness and mind and how these things work. But the Chinese were not like that. They were nature-based. They were the sages in the mountains, understanding how the flow of nature helped us understand the workings of our own hearts and minds. It's very poetic. And hence you have this piece of poetry. And so it's a different kind of expression.
Yeah.
And it was actually let's see, there's a book that I was going to reference. I'm sorry, I'm looking up right now because I thought it was right here. Yes. One of the, I don't know if you have seen or...
I haven't.
So
you haven't seen it? No.
By a scholar, Mu Song, a friend of mine.
Yeah.
It's Trust in Mind, which is a translation of the Hsin Hsin Ming. And if you see the subtitle, it's called, can you see it?
Yeah, The Rebellion of Chinese Zen.
The Rebellion.
Trust it, can we write that
Okay, we won't. We've got it. We've got the video.
Oh, it's on. We're filming it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's no necessity that you read this book, but my point was, this is a turning point. This is a rebellion against, in response to Indian Buddhism, and a departure from the Taoist sages of the Chinese mountains at that time, pointing to something that was striking and powerful and has lasted for over 1,000 years as a result.
It was written over 1,000 years ago. It was.
The exact date you probably have.
Actually, I think David's... Yes, it's a long time.
Yeah, David would, wouldn't he?
Yes, he would. He knows it. Yes, exactly.
I can't remember the exact date. I have it here.
No worries. I think it's actually about 6. Yeah, I think it was.
It may have been 7th century or something
like that. Yes,
I
think it is. 6th or 7th century, yes.
6th or 7th century, so, more than 1,000 years, actually.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Great.
So that's part of your question.
It is, and we'll continue.
To do with this historical context.
Yeah.
But for some reason, for me, because I had originally come from both an academic and a psychological background, it's as you know, it's easy to make things complicated. It's harder to make them elegant or simple. And there's something about this, what I'm calling a Buddho-Taoist response to these teachings, which is so elegant and so simple and straightforward. That doesn't mean simplistic. So that's why I say elegant. And a little tongue-in-cheek, I will say that a great Dharmic statement about this was made by Coco Chanel.
Okay, right.
She said, elegance is refusal. In other words, it's not what you add, it's what you take away.
Oh, okay.
That reveals the simplicity and elegance. And in some ways, this is what we're seeing. And it's why sometimes the Zen aesthetic, whether Chinese or Japanese, sometimes is quite beautiful because it's simplicity, but everything is there. And so it appealed to me in its beautiful elegance and refinement. And the clarity that it seemed to bring, because it's easy to get all philosophical and complicated and think about things, but to go to the heart of the matter and touch its essence and see it expressed in a beautiful way, whether in words or in art or in the arrangement of flowers or in a garden, you see in this aesthetic, which all is expressing the same thing. You see a perfectly made walkway in the garden, and everything is so elegant, and there's one leaf that's fallen.
Yeah.
That you don't sweep away, because it's that one thing that brings it to life. This is how the poem is to me. And so I thought, I think it's an essential teaching that I would go back to. I think I even made this statement in the retreat, that if you took away all my books and texts and things, what would and if I could only be left with one thing to practice with for the rest of my life, what would it be? And I said the Hsin Hsin Ming. Because there's nothing missing, but there's nothing extra added either. It's a deep reminder of all the ways we can be caught in that which causes suffering. And now I'll return to the 3 marks of existence where I started. So in mind, the 3 marks of existence are, number 1, everything is impermanent. Nothing is solid. Everything is interdependent, contingent. In fact, the more complex English word is mutual causality.
Oh.
It's not that they're actually separate things which relate to each other. That everything is one activity in this interdependent web of existence. They are mutually caused. They're not just independent things that relate. So even interdependence is not quite right. It's deeper than that.
Right.
And those 2 things together, anatta and anicca, with their words, no independently existing self or emptiness and impermanence, indicate that this, which we live in and among and as, has specificity and uniqueness in its expression, but it's really one big contingent activity that we parse out and try to understand as separate and individual, because it helps us, and it's necessary to do that. But the backdrop is this mutual causality and flow. We try to make things solid because it helps us not feel frightened. We want to make sure that we have a separate self to which we can relate to the world. It's useful. But they're necessary fictions against the backdrop of something larger. And that's what makes this religious, if you will, or certainly spiritual or philosophical, because it takes us beyond the ordinary way of understanding the world to understand its deeper roots. So those are 2 marks of existence, impermanence and interdependence. The third is dukkha, which is more difficult to translate English, usually translated as suffering, which is not quite right. But it does suggest that if you do not clearly apprehend, not just intellectually understand, impermanence and interdependence in this way we're speaking about that, and if you insist that we're separate beings, separate, and all that, where there is some sort of finality, then you will suffer. And all of that is summarized in the first line. The great way, the understanding of life and death, isn't difficult for those who are unattached to their preferences, who aren't caught in the self-centered dream. And then he goes on to take it deeper and deeper and deeper. So it does take the the Buddhist understanding that came from northern India and the Buddha, but then expresses it in a very unique way.
Well, it kind of leads on to the next question.
I just found it compelling.
Yeah.
And beautiful. And there aren't any teachings that are missing. And yet you have to mine it for all of its depth, which makes it a beautiful thing to practice with for the rest of your life. Because you're not going to exhaust it. It's why you can read Shakespeare over and over and over and not feel like you've exhausted it, because the nature of the language and what it's offering is something really extraordinary. If you have a way of reading it and understanding it and maybe expressing it in a play and enacting it, and that's what Zen asks of us too.
Leads very neatly onto Sarah's first question, which is this one.
Yeah, the Hsin Hsin Ming's all about balance. So, in our meetings, we found ourselves going back to politics and
as one does these days.
Yeah, as one does.
Yeah,
and personal problems, and how can we pull back from things that trouble and challenge us, and then refocus on the Hsin Hsin Ming and Zen? So how do we have that discussion without being distracted?
And then rolled into political?
Yeah. You know, because people say it's all very well to say, let's just not worry about all these things that are happening. But actually they're happening.
Well, and it's not saying let's not worry about them.
Okay.
It doesn't even say don't have preferences. It says don't be so strongly attached to them.
Yeah.
So if you have a preference, for example, let's say you say, I don't think Brexit's a good idea. You have a preference. I don't think Trump's a good idea. I have a preference. That's natural, ordinary. It will happen. There's no way around it. But if I stake my happiness, my equanimity, my okayness on a certain outcome, I'm going to suffer because I don't always get that outcome. But the preference gives me a direction. What do I stand for? What do I want to work for? And let's take it back to Buddhist practice. The two real sort of legs that you're going to stand on, a better metaphor, I think, is the one that's used, the two wings of a bird that allow a bird to fly are wisdom and compassion. Wisdom is this way of seeing clearly with an unclouded eye, without preference, without your conditioning, without your habits, without your fears, without your longings, just that, you know. It's really, really a clear seeing. That's wisdom. To actually see the world as it is, not the way you want it to be, hope it to be, wish it to be. When you see clearly, you're going to necessarily see how much suffering there is in the world, how difficult this whole thing is, how vulnerable we all are, how hard we try, how many things we run into as we attempt to live a good life. That calls up the feeling of compassion. You see the suffering and you want to stay close to it, you want to help. The more you're willing to just stay and not turn away, not react, not get caught up or collapse in the face of suffering, the more you're able to see. The more you're able to see, the more you see the difficulties. That brings up more. So now wisdom and compassion start moving together. So this is what practices like this can offer us, is the ability to see clearly, to respond appropriately. Well, what's the ultimate, let's say, success in politics? To be able to see clearly what's going on, to respond appropriately in community with each other, to take care of each other. So when we see these things that seem to be going what you might consider badly wrong, let's just assume that for a second, and it's painful, it's even shocking, it's maddening, you might feel despair, you might feel rage, all these things, certainly dismay. What you're noticing are all of your habits, your karma of reactivity, which are natural and human, and you want to have enough wisdom to see this way too, not just that way. Oh, this is what I do. This is my habit. This is how it goes. And have compassion for yourself so you can begin to free yourself up from those habitual ways of operating, so you can be more appropriate in the way you act in the world. And so it's quite practical, really. It doesn't say don't have feelings, don't have preferences, and forget it all. Like suddenly you've coated your consciousness with Teflon and everything slides off.
Yeah.
That's not appropriate. That's spiritual bypassing. Mm-hmm. And that's a painful place to be as well. Yeah. That's why in Hsin Hsin Ming it says, don't get lost in emptiness.
Yeah.
And don't get tangled in the world.
Yeah.
There's your political statement. Don't get too tangled in the world, but don't lose yourself in emptiness.
So
don't lose yourself in sort of Zen stepping back, and don't get too caught up. Where do you stand? Well, the middle way is what the Buddha taught. But the middle way isn't a little tiny balance on the fulcrum. That's fundamentalism. That's the straight and narrow. The middle way is finding a place where you can stand in which you are balanced so that you can open wide and inclusive. And so you can meet these polar places with some wisdom and compassion, not to turn away from them so you're undisturbed. And a lot of people think practice is so you'll be undisturbed.
Yeah.
Practice helps us meet the inevitable disturbances and not make things worse, not add to it.
Yeah, I'd be feeling that.
So I've kind of gone on and on here, but this...
No, it's lovely.
Your question?
Yeah, it's great. Okay.
Just a bit of tea.
Yeah, have a little sip. Actually, this picks up on what you were saying. One of the questions was, could you talk to us a little bit about emptiness? Because I think it's something that comes up in the poem a few times. And some of us were not really quite clear about it. I mean, David and Kate had some clarity, having learned from you. So the question, I think, we aspire to emptiness. I think Kate wrote this, using the word in its Buddhist context. However, the Hsin Hsin Ming says, don't get hung up on emptiness. I think actually you've just answered this question, to be honest. If one remains empty, in other words, open and non-judgmental, where does discernment come in? I think you just answered it. But we've been really kind of, working on this.
Because you just said, you assumed an understanding of emptiness.
Yes.
What was the term?
Well, somebody said, if you remain empty, I'm just reading this,
yes.
Open, non-judgmental, etc. Is that empty?
Well, let me just shift that a little bit.
Yeah.
In Buddha's text, when it says something is empty, what is it empty of? It isn't empty of thoughts, feelings, reactivity. It isn't empty of any of that.
Okay.
What it's empty of is of individual existence. It's empty of the notion that you're separate, that you are special, that there's me and then the world. That your consciousness is empty of that distortion, that you think you're separate from the whole thing.
Yeah.
So
I don't quite get that. I mean, that's a big one to take on.
It's a very big one to take on.
So
here's the example.
Okay.
That I've given many times, and I know it might be very, very simplistic in a way, but it's the one that Thich Nhat Hanh uses, which I quite like. He will say, what is this?
A white sheet.
It's a piece of paper.
Yeah.
It's a piece of paper. Okay. What's it made of?
Paper. Trees. Yeah.
Trees. Mm-hmm. Where do the trees come from?
The earth.
And who lived in the trees? The bugs. And who cut them down?
Yeah.
And what are those people? And who are their families? And who took care of and how the trucks come? And where was it manufactured? And on you go from the piece of paper. Mm-hmm. And there actually is no end to it, is there?
No.
There's no edge.
No.
Because everything else has some relation to something else.
Yeah.
And so suddenly you realize this thing that we have made a designated bit of language for, paper, that's just an indicator. But that thing I held in my hand is the entire world. There's nothing it doesn't touch if you take it on out. So And so let's take this idea further. In other words, it's made of non-paper elements. So if you take the chair that you're sitting in, or that I'm sitting in, and you break off the legs, what do you have then? Like a broken chair? You know, you have a and then if you keep pulling it apart, when does chairness disappear? It's only a chair because the elements have come together in such a way that we can name it as a separate object and call it something. But actually, it's made of wood or metal or plastic or fabric or whatever it's made of, and all of those, like paper, are infinitely connected with everything else. So everything, on the one hand, is a little unique expression of the universe, but on the other hand, it's the whole thing, because it's empty of individuality. That's what it's empty of. So it's actually full of everything. This emptiness is a profound inclusion, but what it's empty of is individuality. What it's full of is the entire universe. So we say emptiness is not void, it's not nihilistic.
Yes.
Because that's the nihilistic ditch that people fall into philosophically.
Yeah.
But also, we're empty of the opinions, we're empty of the ideas, we're empty of preferences, and no, we're empty of individuality. So our preferences don't make sense anymore. Yeah, we have them because that's what occurs in human beings. And we don't want to hurt. We want to feel better. We don't want to be in pain. We don't want to. So we have preferences. But if we're attached to things going a certain way, we're going to suffer. And we have to adopt an attitude based on wisdom, clear seeing, an open heart, compassion, an attitude of, oh, now this.
Okay.
Oh, now this. Because it's one now this after another, including, now I'm dying. Oh, now baby's being born. Oh, now we're going to have to suffer a lot because of Brexit. Or, oh, now it got overturned. Oh, now we have this prime minister. Oh, now we have that. Oh, how are we going to respond? How are we going to respond wisely and compassionately? Because this is what's happening. I don't get to control the world, but I get to respond. And within my sphere of influence, I can probably make a little bit of a difference. And that may mean holding on to my friend sitting next to me as we weep or gnash our teeth about it, but maybe that's as good as we can do. But can we do that in a way that doesn't make the world worse, that makes it better? So that's a long answer to the emptiness thing, but does it give you a better feel for it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess that's also true of sort of, everything, like personal pain and, hurt and
Yes.
The same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and people say, well, then how do you relate to it?
Yeah.
To personal pain. Well, suppose you have some very mundane kind of ordinary pain, like you've hurt your wrist or you sprained your ankle in the garden, and somebody says, "Oh, I'm in such pain," and I say, "Okay, now you've named pain, like this is a pen or a piece of paper. Now we've named it something. So now it's a separate thing, cordoned off from the rest of the world, and we have an idea that this is an unpleasant thing that's bad. Okay, let's start breaking it down. Instead of calling it pain, what's the actual sensation or sensations that you can name? Is that, well, it's sort of sharp, and it's here, and it kind of gets strong, and then it goes away, and if I move it, then you begin to, there is a sharp sensation. Is there anything terribly wrong right now? Well, no, it's just a sharp sensation. And then if you move it this way, it's a little better, or then it changes, and then you're in the world of ongoing, impermanent, interdependent sensations in the moment, rather than calling it a pain and then having to relate to it. The same for emotional pain. I feel anxious. Okay, you have an anxiety. Okay, now you've named it. what is actually happening. Here's the key. What's the embodied? Immediacy.
Mm.
Well, I feel a tightness in my chest. I feel a shakiness. You feel a tightness in your chest. Is anything terrible happening? No, I just feel this tightness in my chest. And then I feel jitteriness in my tummy. Is something bad happening? Well, I feel this jitteriness. And as you name it, does it change? And so you stay with the embodied immediacy instead of separating it off as anxiety and having to relate to this thing that you have to get rid of or fix or something. Stay with the actual unfolding of interdependent, contingent, impermanent experience. That's a very different way of being, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this is what the Hsin Hsin Ming is pointing to. It's not saying turn your back to the world, forget things, don't be impacted by the world. Not being impacted by the world is a problem.
Mm. Mm.
Not caring about people and things is a big problem. It means when we meet the world, let's hopefully meet it as clear-eyed as we can and as open-hearted as we can and do what we can, knowing that we're limited, knowing that we're vulnerable, knowing that it's unlikely to go our way, but still staying committed to life and appreciating our life. You know, I may not feel that great, but boy, do I appreciate being alive. It's not fixing your life so it's not perfect. It's learning to deeply appreciate your life no matter how it goes.
Mm.
So not being swept away.
Mm.
And when we are, because we will be, being so kind to ourselves, oh, there's being swept away. How do I find my moorings? How do I receive help from my friends? That's what refuge is for. We take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. What do we return to? And then, you know, the teachings go out from the Hsin Hsin Ming, and we begin to realize why these parts of practice are eminently practical, not esoteric.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
You know, in the latter part where it says, the best you can say is not to, that part of the Hsin Hsin Ming, say, we are individuals, but we're not disconnected. So it's not exactly one, but it's not exactly two. So the best you can say is not two.
Not two. Yes, that's right. Yes.
So it's what they're doing is trying to say this is hard with a dualistic mind to understand these things.
Yeah.
Because are we separate? Of course. I'm here in Hawaii. You're there in England. You're a woman. I'm a man. All these things are true. Kind of. So you can't say that we're the same. But can you say that we're different? Because what animates you and me and everything else is all the same. So we can't say that we're separate. So from a dualistic place, you can't really land anywhere. And so it says, so the best you can say is not to.
Yeah. 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 Because there's one bit in here which I circled, which is being is an aspect of non-being and not... Oh, you've frozen. Are you...
Oh.
I don't know what's happened.
I'm going to turn off the camera for 1 second.
Okay.
And I'll turn it back on.
Okay.
And it won't have that strange look on my face.
Yeah, you're back again. It's lovely.
You know, it's too bad practice isn't that easy.
Yeah.
If we could turn off our consciousness for 1 second and refresh it, instead of frozen in our habit patterns and our karmic conditioning, then we'd be animated back into the world again.
Yes. I guess that's sitting. Is that a bit about sitting? Just like turning off the camera for a minute and just...
For a moment, it's like rebooting.
Yeah. Yeah.
To do that. But your question was about being as an aspect of non-being, non-being and that's being.
Isn't it no different from being? I guess you've up.
But what's the statement after?
And it's until you understand this truth, you won't see anything clearly.
Yeah, so it kind of puts a point on it, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In other words, being, the coming into fruition as an individual person. where does everything come from? Emptiness. What does it go back to? Emptiness. Well, how does emptiness know itself and express itself? Through form. What it's doing right there, it's echoing the Heart Sutra. And this is more exegesis, interesting compared to philosophy, religion, is that this is where the Taoist sages are reading the Heart Sutra from India, where it says form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is exactly emptiness. Emptiness is exactly form. How does emptiness express itself? In form. What is form? The effluent expression of emptiness. And that's what it's saying in the Hsin Hsin Ming.
Yeah.
This is just a different wording to talk about the essence of the Heart Sutra.
It's like a breathing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so they would use elements from nature, the wind and the leaves, the clouds covering the moon, all those things in Taoist poetry, pointing to these deeper teachings, but in a way that's beautifully embodied rather than intellectual.
Well, one of the next question. Oh, I think this was. Anyway, shall I ask that one? Yes. In the poem, and we're just getting to the next verse, I think, that talks about the Tao, which I think is it the Tao or the Tao?
Well, they say it like a D as in dog.
Oh, do they? Oh, okay. And well, I think actually you've talked about it. So somebody said, "Can you talk about the relationship between Taoism and Zen?" But I think you probably have.
Yeah. So Taoism is the sort of philosophical religion of China at that time.
Okay.
Pointed out by Lao Tzu and some of the other great teachers. And they took the Buddhist teachings.
Yes.
And that became Chan or Zen.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a wonderful book called The Tao of Zen about this history. And the first line of the entire volume is Zen is Taoism disguised as Buddhism. And this poem is the bridge between the two.
Lovely.
Yeah. Where have we got to? Okay, we've done that.
Oceans meeting.
So if you read, for example, the Tao Te Ching, famous Taoist manuscript, the Tao Te Ching, you will see in it elements that seem you can see that foundations of Zen in there.
There are several translations of the Hsin Hsin Ming.
Oh, yeah,
we've been looking at the one that you used, Sheldon, and some people have found, I think a couple of others have been found. There's one that Suzuki, I think, commented on, and there's another one from Zen site. I don't know. Some people are finding Are there lots? Is this the one that you chose? Is just one that kind of?
It's one that I kind of grew up on with my teacher, and so I was familiar with it. And actually, I prefer it over every one I've seen thus far, primarily because of the translation of the first line. It says, the great way is not difficult for those who are unattached to their preferences. Almost all the others will say, the great way isn't difficult for those who have no preferences.
Ah, okay.
Or, it's very categorical, which I think is inappropriate. You have preferences. You're not going to become a person with no preferences, but you cannot be attached to them and notice the way they move through me as a human being and not let them guide me, not let my preferences guide my life. But you're going to have them. If you don't, it's kind of weird. You want to be a person with no preference? It's like life would be kind of dull and nothing.
Well, we ran out of questions, but obviously not out of wanting to spend time with you.
You exhausted at least your list.
Huh?
We've exhausted
the list.
But what a rich conversation it seems to have been.
Really?
For me, anyway.
It's been wonderful. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. And I'm quite...
I hope that what we've recorded will be helpful to others.
I think they'll love it. Yes.
And thank you for today. It's been wonderful.
It's been really lovely. Thank you so much, Flint.
Okay.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Take
Take care. Bye.
Bye.